Good afternoon and welcome to the Washington Report with Tea Party Patriots Action. I'm Bill Pasco, Tea Party Patriots man in Washington. Let's get to it. The House and Senate are still in recess. The House will return August 31st. The Senate will return on September 14th. Now let's talk about the Save America Act. I'm going to try out a new argument in favor of the Save America Act, courtesy of a piece in the Daily Signal by Ken Cuccinelli. For those of you who don't know who Ken is, he was a state senator in Virginia from 2002 to 2010. He was the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Virginia from 2010 to 2014, and he was the Republican nominee for governor in 2013. He knows a little something about the importance of each vote cast. When he ran for re-election to the state Senate in 2006, which you may recall was a difficult year for Republicans all over the country, Ken won re-election by just 92 votes out of 37,000 votes cast. Ken notes something I haven't seen elsewhere. Opponents of the Save America Act say it's too cumbersome and its requirements on citizenship verification are too onerous. They make it sound as if we never verify citizenship of certain voters. But Ken points out that when the Department of Justice indicts a non-citizen for voting illegally, it does so only after having conducted an investigation into that voter's citizenship status. That is, we do perform a check to verify a voter's citizenship status. We just do it after the voter has been suspected or accused of voting illegally. And Ken asks the natural question. If we're going to go through the steps necessary to verify a voter's citizenship anyway, why don't we just do it before they cast an illegal vote rather than wait until after they've done it? Quote, removing ineligible registrations protects future elections, and prosecuting those who knowingly violate election law punishes offenders. But neither can retrieve an unlawful ballot after it has been counted and incorporated into a certified election result, end quote, he writes. He continues, quote, existing law already limits voting to U.S. citizens. Thus, the issue is not whether non-citizen voting is legal, but whether citizenship is verified before someone is added to the voter rolls. The Save America Act would move that safeguard to the beginning of the registration process rather than relying primarily on audits, database comparisons, and criminal investigations years later, unquote, he continues. Quote, the real measure of election integrity is not the number of post hoc removals for ineligible registrations, but whether such ineligible registrations are prevented in the first place. The Save America Act offers the preventive answer, citizenship verification before registration, rather than prosecution after an illegal ballot has already been cast, unquote, he concludes. And there, he nails it. The true test of election integrity systems is not how many people it catches voting illegally after the fact. It's the number of people it prevents from voting illegally before they ever cast a ballot. Now to the latest on ICE. It's been several months since we discussed Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and for the most part, we've discussed ICE in the context of funding and government shutdowns related to Democrats' unwillingness to allow any bill funding ICE to move through the Senate. We've got a new topic for discussion regarding ICE, and that is an announcement made 7 days ago on the Department of Homeland Security website. The department announced that it plans to spend up to $20 million to purchase thousands of pairs of what it calls conductive distraction and de-escalation devices, unquote, for its officers and agents to use. The devices are known as the GLOVE, which is an acronym for Generated Low Output Voltage Emitter. Isn't that clever? And they are made by, I'm not making this up, Compliant Technologies, LLC of Lexington, Kentucky. They are, in 2 words, electroshock gloves. The company says the gloves function as a normal pair of gloves until wearers press a switch to activate them. Once turned on, the gloves must be applied directly to someone's skin to deliver a pain stimulus. Unlike a taser, the electricity delivered to the recipient does not incapacitate the recipient, and it does not leave permanent marks. But the pain the gloves inflict is serious enough to help an officer or agent gain compliance within seconds. And it's serious enough that a law enforcement officer who's been subjected to the pain did not want to demonstrate its safety by having to suffer it again. No repeat encounters. One encounter with the electric shock from the gloves was quite enough for him. Thank you very much. According to the Associated Press, quote, civil rights advocates expressed alarm at the plan, unquote. And I imagine that when the House reconvenes 2 weeks from today, Democrats will want to talk about ICE using electroshock gloves. Now to the latest on the Supreme Court. Less than 100 days before an election, Democrats hope will return the party to control over either the House or the Senate, or possibly both. 78 days, in fact, from today. The Washington Post publishes a review of various legislation regarding the Supreme Court that Democrats have introduced and wish to see enacted. Quote, one bill proposes increasing the number of Supreme Court justices from 9 to 13. Another would cut their lifetime terms to 18 years. Others would create an enforceable ethics code and place standards on how the court rules from its relatively opaque shadow docket. The latest wave of proposals to overhaul the Supreme Court have reached something of a fever pitch over the past few months, as Democrats grow increasingly frustrated with the court's rightward turn, unquote. Let's be clear. This is about Democrats' refusal to play by the rules as they've existed in this country for more than 150 years. It was in 1869 that Congress passed the not coincidentally named Judiciary Act of 1869, which set the number of justices on the Supreme Court at 9. And it's been 9 ever since. The legislation to change the number of justices from 9 to 13 would allow a new president, presumably a Democrat, to add 4 new justices to the court. Those 4 new justices would be appointed by the president who signed the new law into effect. Again, presumably a Democrat. So, a new Democrat president would be able to add 4 new justices to the court. And those 4 new justices, in addition to the 3 justices there now, who were appointed by Democrat presidents, would bring the total number of justices appointed by Democrat presidents to 7. Creating a new majority against the 6 who were appointed by Republican presidents. It's pretty nifty math. It's also absurdly obvious. Democrats just don't want to play by the rules because in their eyes, the Supreme Court is an institution that should always be controlled by liberals and Democrats, not conservatives and Republicans. Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to change the number of justices on the Supreme Court. In 1937, just months after winning a massive re-election victory that was so big, it left his party with control over 76 of the 96 seats in the Senate. FDR was looking to roll over the Supreme Court, which had struck down in his first term several of the agencies he created through his New Deal program. So he introduced his fabled court packing scheme to add to the number of seats on the court so he could appoint new justices that would make up a majority of the court. But even his own party rejected it, despite having a 60-vote margin in the Senate. The Senate rejected the plan by a vote of 70 to 20. I doubt Democrats would reject a Democrat president's legislation to pack the court today. In order to avoid that anytime in the near or even distant future, Republicans are going to have to maintain control of at least one house of Congress or the White House. Now to a discussion of the national debt. The Congressional Budget Office last Monday released its monthly budget update for July, and the numbers were shocking compared to the same 10-month period in fiscal 2025, when the federal government spent $308 billion more than it did a year ago. Tax receipts increased year over year by $139 billion. So the deficit increased by $169 billion. Worse, CBO also noted that it now estimates that this year's budget deficit will be $2.1 trillion. That's up $200 billion from last year. And we can't blame it on COVID-19. This is a structural deficit. The federal government, until one of two things happens, is on track to continue spending $2 trillion more every year than we take in. What are the two things that could happen? Well, we could increase revenues into the Treasury, or we could reduce outflows from the Treasury. Meanwhile, the national debt nears $40 trillion, and because it's so big, major money managers, the kind of people who regularly make massive purchases of U.S. securities, are getting skittish about long-term prospects for the U.S. economy. We saw more proof of that last Thursday when the Treasury conducted an auction of $25 billion worth of 30-year Treasury bills. In order to entice people to buy the 30-year bonds, the Treasury had to push the yield all the way up to 5.22%. That's higher than they've had to go since August of 2001, after which auctions of 30-year bonds were suspended for 5 years. That comes hard on the heels of a $42 billion auction for 10-year notes just the day before. They could only be sold when Treasury upped the yield to its highest since 2007. This is likely to get worse before it gets better. Here's what's making it worse: Social Security. Watch out for Social Security tax hikes coming. We've already discussed Elizabeth Warren's proposal to have a $3 trillion tax hike to cover the Social Security trust fund's looming insolvency. And no, I have not forgotten, Republican Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio has joined her in her call for that tax hike. Now we have the Promise Act, introduced as a bipartisan piece of legislation meant to extend the life of the program. It was introduced by 8 senators, led by retiring Democrat Dick Durbin of Illinois and retiring Republican Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. The bill does not directly cut Social Security benefits or raise Social Security taxes. Instead, it would create a bipartisan board and mandate that the board write a plan to keep the retirement system funded for another 50 years, most likely by cutting benefits and raising taxes. The legislation would also establish parliamentary rules that would make it easier for Congress to act on the board's proposal. The plan created by the board could be debated on the floor of the Senate for up to 100 hours, but no longer. So there would not have to be a vote to invoke cloture on the debate. On the other hand, in order to pass the plan, 60 votes would be required in the Senate. So the special procedural rules wouldn't get rid of the 60-vote threshold entirely. They would move that 60-vote threshold to the last vote on the matter. It's the hope of the retiring senators that the bill could be acted on in the lame duck session. Why? Clever. As of right now, there are 70 members of the House of Representatives who will not be coming back to serve in the 120th Congress. 40 Republicans and 30 Democrats. And there are 13 senators who will not be coming back to serve in the 120th Congress. 9 Republicans and 4 Democrats. I'm sure it's the hope of the bill's bipartisan co-sponsors, Durbin and Cassidy, and their fellow bill co-sponsors, that the ranks of those not returning will be filled with people who love their idea and want to support it. But it's still going to take an awful lot more support to get this bill across the finish line and get it signed into law by a president who swore on the campaign trail in 2016 and 2020 and 2024 that he was not going to touch Social Security, or Medicare. Now let's talk about Katie Miller and the Rubios, Marco and Jeanette. August recess is typically a slow time in Washington. There's not a lot of legislative activity going on. Most members of Congress are out of town. They're either back home campaigning for re-election if they've got a contest on their hands, or if they're like the vast majority of members of Congress in heavily gerrymandered districts, they don't have to worry about re-election, and so they take advantage of the August recess to travel overseas for meetings with foreign government officials. The result is that those who are still here in Washington scrounge for things to talk about. This week, that thing is a 1-hour podcast episode, an episode of Katie Miller's podcast, in which she interviews Marco Rubio and his wife, Jeanette. If you can sit through this hour and come away still unconvinced that this couple should at some point be president and first lady, you've got something in you that escapes the rest of us, because the vast majority of the talk I've heard about this interview is favorable. I'll give you just one treat from the interview. Discussing HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s MAHA movement, Secretary Rubio declares the Pop-Tart, quote, one of the greatest American innovations in the history of the world, unquote. It's an entertaining and informative hour. It's August. What else are you going to watch? Now to our call to action. The call to action this week is simple. Please call your member of Congress and your senators and urge them to vote yes on the Save America Act. President Trump has demanded that the Save America Act be passed. Currently, it is stalled, and America's elections are at risk. Call your member of Congress and urge him or her to join President Trump's call to attach the Save America Act to every single piece of must-pass legislation the House passes until it is signed into law. Secondly, tell your congressman or congresswoman to stop the so-called Dignity Act. That bill is amnesty, plain and simple. We do not accept amnesty. Not now, not ever. Lastly, thank President Trump on social media for his leadership and persistence with his effort to secure America's elections. And that's our Washington Report for this week. If you've got any questions or comments, please drop us a line at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. That's jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. If you want me to answer a question during the broadcast, just put "for broadcast" in the subject line. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Washington Report. Same time, same channel. Until then, be well and be active.